Okay, hey folks, Mark Locklear here, and this is a screencast on Chapter 1. So not going to do a ton of coding here. Basically Chapter 1 is just, the big thing is getting your environment set up and making sure that you can create the Hello World program that we talked about. So I'll just talk a little bit about the content from Chapter 1, some of the advantages of C++, characteristics of the language. And then I'll go in and we'll just look, I'll show you how to create a program from scratch, as well as opening an existing program. So, so C++, just to give you a little bit of my history, C++ is actually the first programming language I learned to program, and that would have been in 1994. I was in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri at the time. I was in the Army, and I got an associate's degree in information systems, and one of the required programming classes was a C++ class. So it's one of the first programming languages I was exposed to. I've never really done much with C++ since then. I've never programmed it in a production environment, but the way I teach, the way I'm going to teach this class and the way I teach other programming classes at AB Tech is that I'm sort of, my approach is I'm teaching you software development, and oh, by the way, we're going to use C++ to teach you that. So I try to keep the concepts that I teach very broad. Obviously, the syntax will be very specific to C++, but from a conceptual standpoint, I try to keep the concepts broad so that they're going to apply to any programming language. So as an example, when you learn a while loop or a for loop in C++, again, we'll talk about the specific syntax that C++ uses, but we'll sort of talk about it in such a way and learn it in such a way that it's going to apply really across any programming language you might use. See, let's talk about this process of C++ being a compiled programming language. So the book sort of goes into more detail about it, but just a couple of words on that. So when you're in the IDE actually writing code, that's sort of considered the book calls that a high level code. So you're writing sort of a human readable code. The compile process actually turns that into machine code, and that machine code is just zeros and ones, but that's code that the computer can actually understand and run. So in a sense, the IDE is just a way for us as human beings to interact with the computer and tell it what we want it to do, right? And we have to use things like CC out and CN to get input into the computer, for the computer to give us output back. We have to use those terms, but when it's actually compiled down, it's all zeros and ones, and that's what we talk about when we talk about a compiled language. That's what we're talking about there. And this idea of compiling is, again, taking this high level language, the code that we write, and then actually sort of compressing that down into code that can actually be run on the computer. Some of the advantages of C++, so it's fast. That's probably one of the first things you generally hear about C++ is that the speed and efficiency of the language. I think there was once a graphic that was going around the internet, and it had programming languages on the left and then types of cars on the right. I don't really remember many of the other ones, but I remember C++ was a Porsche 911, right? The idea is it's fast. I mean, it's made for speed. And I think, now that I think about it, I think the basic programming language was like a Jeep, a old Willys Jeep, because it was sort of basic and tough and, sort of square box. But again, one of the biggest advantages, or one of the biggest reasons people want to use C++ is speed, right? Has the ability to process data, do calculations very quickly and in a very efficient manner. Also with that speed and efficiency, it's able to run on a lot of different devices, right? So when we think about PHP, for instance, as a programming language, we just think about web development there, right? Because that's what it's made for. So I mean, it's flexible in the sense that it can be run on any device that has a web browser on it, but it's not efficient, or it's not it's not robust in the standpoint that like you couldn't run PHP on a printer, right? You couldn't run PHP on a on your television set, let's say. Well, C++ you can. You can. It's very. It can be very memory uh, efficient. So you can have very small programs. So when we talk about embedded devices, whether that's on like a television set, your refrigerator, your microwave oven, many of those things are written in either C or C++ because again, you have the ability to write very small programs, so there's not a lot of memory needed. Also, C++ is considered a very low level language, low level in that it can be, it can interact with many different kinds of hardware. So I think the book mentions medical devices too that you'll often see C++ used in medical devices. Okay, so with that being said, let's look at some code. So let's do my desktop here. Okay. So let's talk about platforms. So many of you will be using Windows. Some of you will be using Mac. I have a Mac. Not that I'm a Mac fanboy or anything. That's just what my the organization I work for buys my computers. So I generally choose Mac. But that is what it is. So I'll be using Xcode. Many of you will be using Windows, in which case you'll be using Visual Studio. Generally, there's not an issue there. This is only the second time I've taught this class. First time was this past spring. So one of the issues I have ran into is there's slight differences in the programming. There's slight differences in some of the methods that can be used between Mac and Windows. So I've had issues with students who have been on Windows, and I was not able to compile their code. So we'll just work through those. I will say that if I don't give you full credit on assignment, I'll usually say, hey, this is not running for me. Is it running for you? If so, and so we'll just work that out. I've had students submit like screenshots to me and things like that. If they're if I can't get their code to compile and run correctly, so just sort of know that that can be an issue, but we'll work through it. So when you're creating a new project, I am going to again on Xcode, I'm going to create this create new project button. I'm going to do I'll choose Mac OS up here, and then command line tool. You can give it a name, so I'll just call this Hello World. Say next. It gives you the location, so just be aware of that because you're going to need the submission you're going to make to me is a .cpp file. So just sort of know that you need to know the location to be able to browse to it on the computer to get that file to submit to me. I don't want the whole project. I only want the .cpp file. Okay. And notice that right out of the box, at least on Xcode, you get your standard C++ program is this Hello World program. So in fact, I can go ahead and run this. Yours will look similar. Visual Studio, the layout is similar in a very general way. Yours, the toolbar is up top, and so it's a little different. But generally, you've got a little like run or build button. So you'll click that. I get this build succeeded message, and usually the first time I've noticed it takes a little while, and then the output again on Xcode is down in the bottom here. Visual Studio on Windows is going to open up a command line window. It'll open it up and then it closes it when the program ends, which is kind of annoying. You can change the exit code at the end to wait for a prompt. So just know that if you're having issues with that, you've got the ability to do that. Generally, the structure of code is going to be you're going to have comments at the top. I do want you to put your name, the date, and the class. So CSC 130, CSC 134 up top here. Put that inside the comment section of all the programs that you submit. I'll take off points if you don't. And then, of course, the body of your code is going to be down here. So in this case, again, you can see we're doing we haven't covered all this yet, but a simple cout statement is just simply printing some code out. And I mean, just as a sanity check, I can say, this is a test. And then if I actually run that, and notice I can see the output here. Okay, so that's really all there is to just creating a standard program from scratch. Notice on the side over here, you've got this hello world, this file and folder structure. And in fact, I created mine on my desktop so you can see it here. Notice here is the project file. So generally if you're opening, and we'll see this when I open the existing file, you want to open this project file. You don't want to browse down to the CPP file, which is the C++ file, the actual code. You want to choose this project file to actually open it up. So in fact, let's see that now. If I go and I do open, I'll go to Murach CPP, and you all should have. So in the book files, when you download those, you've got, notice there's going to be a VS Code and an Xcode folder. If you're using obviously Visual Studio Code, you'll want to use VS Code. I'm on Xcode. The example starts are the starter programs for the chapter exercises. So you can click on those. I would encourage you to do that for the exercise I give you. Generally, one of the exercises will be, I'll assign a book exercise. You've got the solution for it if you go to example solutions here. But if you want to challenge yourself, and I'm going to recommend that you certainly should challenge yourself and give yourself 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 5 hours, whatever works for you, to really, sort of throw yourself into the chapter exercises and see if you can do those. Now, I'll also be asking you to modify some of these existing exercises, and then we've also got the project exercises, which you don't have solutions for. So those are going to be, those will be the most challenging ones. But I'm going to go to the example starts, and let's just open up the guest book. And notice I chose the project, not the CPP file. And then when it opens here, I can click on main.cpp, and of course I can see all of that code. Okay. That's really all there is to it. I'm not particularly crazy about, for Mac folks, I'm not crazy about the Xcode IDE. There's just a lot of things that it's lacking, like when you think of a true IDE as far as IntelliSense and code completion and some sort of bells and whistles that make programming nice. Xcode doesn't do a lot of that. So I've thought about experimenting with NetBeans is what we use for the Java class, and that's generally considered a pretty good IDE. So there are other options out there. Visual Studio, I think, is pretty good. It has a lot of the code completion and things like that for you. So, all righty, I think that's all for now for chapter 1. Good luck.